Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In my hand, I have the highly anticipated A7CR, and well, I'm not gonna get it. There's a few reasons for that. I've been using it for the past few weeks. So we're gonna compare the A7C2 to the A7CR, like kind of review what are the differences, what you should be aware of, and then how does it compare to the bigger cameras, the A7R5 and the A7 IV that it is trying to replace and compact into a small format. And most importantly, I'm going to share with you my experience and the shots that I've taken with it and how it felt on the field in the real world shooting with that camera, because there's a lot to be said. So if you're ready, we're going to get started right now. But first, let's thank our sponsor of the day, Whitewall, an awesome print lab that I've been using for years and that created an awesome discount for you guys with a link in the description to print your next photos. No matter what kind of camera you're using, you can print your work, put it on the wall, share it with your friends, make a book with it, and you'll see it's gonna feel completely different from looking at it on a smartphone, a back of a camera, or on a screen. So if you're ready, let's get started. Woo! Exciting times. Welcome, guys. I'm excited to share a little bit about this A7CR, A7C2 release. We also have a really cool 16-35 GM2 that came out, but that will be for a different video. I actually wrote down all my thoughts to compare those cameras, not only between each other, but also with the A7R5, the A7 IV, and it's written on the back of a pizza box, which makes it a lot more interesting for sure. But the most important, I kind of needed to draft down my thoughts after shooting with it for a few weeks. There's a few things that surprised me that I want to share. We're gonna get right started with a little bit of the spec or the comparison between those two cameras so you can understand in general what's gonna be the deal with those cameras. Okay, let's be real here. A7C2 is trying to replace or like at least create a compact version of the A7 IV. The A7CR and the A7C2 have the same body. It's gonna look exactly the same. Small cameras, compact, feels good in the hand. Small grip, not the big grip. If you want a big grip, get a big camera. But it's cool. You know, even the A7CR comes with a grip that you put under. But then I find it a little bit weird because then I end up with a camera that's almost as big as a A7 IV or A7R5. So why get a compact camera if I have to put a grip? Unless the grip could have a vertical shooting mode, but it doesn't. Now on the other side, we have the A7CR, which is kind of a compact version of the A7R5. It has a lot to offer, right? Those two camera bodies really feel like tiny versions of those two cameras. But there are a few points that I circle right here that are actually different between those cameras. I'll get to them very quickly. The first thing you need to know is that the A7C2 has 33 megapixel versus the A7CR is gonna have 61 megapixel. So same sensor as the A7 IV and A7R5. The autofocus system is the same for the A7C2 as the A7 IV, except something huge that has been added, which a lot of you are gonna love. So we have 94% of the frame with phase and contrast detection for the A7C2, and the A7CR is the same as the A7R5. We're gonna have 75% of the image with phase detection. What does that mean? Honestly, maybe not that much when you're shooting with it. In both cases, they perform great. I don't miss my shots when I take images. More coverage on your sensor is cool because it can be detected faster in the frame, even when it's on the sides, and you can move your focus points closer to the edges of your frame. Those two cameras now have the autofocus AI built in. Just like on the A7R5, you have the AI subject detection, and on the A7C2, you have it too, which is actually better than the A7 IV if you think about it. The A7 IV doesn't have that AI processing. Now, this small, tiny, compact camera will have it. There's not going to be any firmware update that's ever going to replace that on the A7 IV. By the way, hey, Sony, firmware updates. Anything? No? I know you love to release cameras, but maybe we could have a new firmware updates for, I would say, a flagship camera like the A1. Okay, banter aside, let's talk very quickly about a few other specs. For both, you can do 4K, 422, 10 bits, 24, 30 frames per second. But one of them, the A7C2, can only do 60 frames per second in 4K in crop mode. But the A7CR allows you to do 4K 60 frames per second even in full frame. which is great. And then you can do 7K oversampled on the A7C2, which I would never do, and oversampled 6.2K, but in crop mode on the A7CR. So if you need to do video, well, make sure you read the lines on the video. I think that was the biggest difference. In terms of monitor and viewfinder, as you can tell right now, the viewfinder is tiny, like tiny viewfinder. The viewfinder has 2.3 million dots for both this camera and the A7C2. 1 million dots for the back screen on both cameras. Now compare that to the A7R5 that has 2 million dots for the screen, which is double, and the resolution on those look mint. Even the Canon R8 has 1.6 million dots, which looks really good too. And then the viewfinder on the A7R5 has actually 9 million dots. I can tell you, when you look at it, it feels very different. Now the A7 IV has 3.6 million dots in the viewfinder. It's a little bit better than those two cameras. Another big difference between the big camera and the small camera you're gonna have is that you have one SD card in those compact cameras versus you have two in the A7 IV and A7R5. So you're gonna have to keep that in mind. Honestly, it's gonna be important depending on the kind of work you're doing. Next, should we talk about the price right now, or should I share my experience? I think I'll share my experience first, and we'll wrap up on the price and the price difference between the bigger cameras, because I think it's going to be very interesting to see. And actually, the conclusion is going to be a little tricky, but I have my opinion at least, and I would love to hear your thoughts. But before that, have you ever done a photo book for yourself with your work or for your family, with all the shots you've taken in an area or through the years? I highly recommend you to do that. Today we have Whitewall as a sponsor. They have photo books available, so you can create your own coffee table book with beautiful, high quality photos inside a book. And honestly, just the process of creating a book, which I'm starting to go through also. I've done several in the past for clients, but now I'm going to do one for myself, is a great process of reviewing your work and really trying to learn what you did well, what you don't do well, and how you can put photos together. And that, in my opinion, is super important. Also, I've printed that print with Whitewall, which is an acrylic print, which gives a lot of depth and looks great. They even have great customer service, because one time I had a damaged print arrive and they literally sent me a new one for free. So whether you're trying to print for your next photo book or a print that you want to hang on the wall, check out Whitewall. I've used Whitewall for myself and my clients over the years, and I recently saw a lot of your comments saying that you received your first print from Whitewall and you were super excited. For some of you, bringing your photography back in the real world completely changed how you perceive your work, and I highly encourage it to anyone. Don't just get into buying new cameras. Really spend the time to hone in your craft and bring it to the real world. And with that said, let's talk about my real world experience with this A7CR. So how was it shooting with the A7CR in the real world? It was just as great as with any other camera, except for one first big thing that really annoys me, is that the resolution in the viewfinder does not look great, nor at the back of the screen. I think it could be improved. This is something that I've been kind of disappointed. A lot of people have been saying, how come Sony with Sony Xperia, which is a beautiful phone with like super high definition screens, is not able to give us a better viewing experience in the camera? And that's definitely something I felt when I was shooting. Every time I would like try to use the viewfinder, first of all, the viewfinder was kind of hurting my eye. Nothing is soft. It's like really hard and it's tiny. And it really made me think, okay, this is not a camera for people who like viewfinders. So you might be thinking now, I may get this camera for two reasons. The A7C2 is like a A7 IV, so I won't get an A7 IV. I'll get it because it has AI autofocus. But in my experience, when I was shooting, I never shoot with like full screen wide points. Why? Because I don't know where my focus is gonna go. And as good as the AI autofocus can be, it's a little bit of a wild card sometimes, you know? And yes, on Sony, you have to choose between animals, birds, trains, planes, etc., which is good because it forces the camera to detect one type of subject. But for the hybrid type of shooting that I'm doing, and when I say hybrid, it means portrait, street, landscapes, underwater, I actually don't want to be having to change that all the time. So what I do is I shoot in point focus with tracking. And this has been great since the A7 III. So yes, the AI autofocus is a great feature, but I don't really need it that much, except for people I think the AI autofocus for people and how it tracks the body and even when the face is turned is actually really, really accurate and really good. But honestly, I've been taking photos for years and I never really felt that, ooh, AI autofocus changed everything around me. You know, like it's almost like talking to a wedding photographer and asking him, hey, were you taking blurry shots 5 years ago? And he'll be like, no, I trained with the autofocus I had. I was doing the best with it. And yeah, sure, it could make it a little bit easier, the AI autofocus, but it's not gonna change everything in my life. So in terms of grip, I kind of felt like, well, it's a small camera. It felt good in my hand, but the front wheel, which was another thing, I don't know if you can tell, that little front wheel where you can dial in usually your aperture or stuff, is actually hard, a little hard, I find, to access, because it's very close to the power and the shutter button. And when you have 3 fingers on the grip, well, actually I'm covering almost that button. Now, I love the flip screen. It's great when you store it in the bag, but also it's great for like creative shots or like shooting higher and you can see things. I love the new menus. Those are very intuitive with Sony. I found that very helpful. And I will say the touch focus is pretty responsive. On those 2 cameras, on the A7 II and A7R, we're talking 7 to 8 frames per second of burst mode. But if you compare that to Canon R8 that has 40 frames per second, sure, it's capped at like maybe 56 photos, and then it goes down to 6 frames per second, but it's still like miles and miles ahead in terms of burst. Sometimes I felt it was a little slow for what I wanted, but in hindsight, now I look at the photos and how I shot, I think it's okay. I just think you're on the lower limit if you're trying to do sport or like anything that's really high speed and where you really want to get a lot of frames per second when you shoot. This might be a little tight. And I was a little disappointed because they have electronic shutter and you can go a lot faster with the electronic shutter. So I don't know which other part in the camera is like kind of limiting that, or if it's just artificial. But yeah, that kind of surprised me, honestly. Now, the image quality is great. It's the same sensor as those 2 big cameras, A7R5, A7 IV, and it's hard to say anything negative about it. And honestly, look, I edited the photos, dropped them on my laptop, edited them, and I could not tell you which camera would have taken them. I applied my presets like I always do. I got my before, my after, and I'm happy with it. You know, it's like, yeah, it always looks great. And I think your decision choice should not be made on the image quality because this is kind of a given, just like the autofocus is nowadays. So what should be your choice made on? What was my choice made on? And why do I have the opinion I'm going to be sharing with you in 2 seconds? That's going to be a really interesting question. And I just want to say that if you want the full experience of me shooting with this camera in the streets of Chicago, I put a POV with just that. And you can see the before after of all the photos and how I shot them. And honestly, you'll see in the experience that it doesn't feel that different from another camera. So keep that in mind, please, when you're spending money to buy gear. Okay, conclusion. Why I wouldn't get neither of those cameras. And this is a tough one. So I want to hear your thoughts so far. What do you think about that camera? Is it something you would get? Is it not something you would get? Because personally, I would not get the A7R. For sure, I would not get it. I love the form factor, but I have a camera bag. And whether
this is that size or it is the size of the A1 body or A7R5 or A7 IV, it's not the end of the world. You know, like those camera bodies, yeah, sure, they're gonna be a little heavier, but they feel better for me in hand. So definitely not the everyday camera that you could be hoping for with, let's say, RX1 or 2, for example. Hopefully there will be a version 3. It could be cool with a compact lens. I've done it where I would spend the day with a 24 with a 20mm, but it wasn't such a difference that I would not take my other camera. I'll be honest with you. Now, if I didn't have any other cameras, if I didn't have my A1 or my A7S III, well, maybe this would be a great camera to consider if I was doing leisure, no professional work, no need to double back up my memory cards. I definitely would consider it, especially because that A7C2 ends up actually better, in my opinion, than the A7 IV because it has the AI autofocus, an updated also auto exposure algorithm, which is great. It really helps make things a little easier. You get the best, latest technology in your camera, right? The final price is being announced, but it was around 2.2 or 2.3K, which makes it $200 to $400 cheaper than the A7 IV. So this could be a good thing for saving a little bit of money and having the latest and best technology in this camera. But again, This is if you don't shoot professionally and need double backing up your photos, and if you can do with a tiny EVS. Now, A7CR and A7R5, we have a $7,000 to $1,000 difference between the two cameras, which in my opinion is really big. This literally is a ticket to one of your favorite destinations in the world, really far out to take photos. So this might be something to consider if you're trying to do travel, a cool trip, you want to take a really great camera, but you don't want to spend for the A7R5. The A7CR could be great for you. Personally, again, like I said, I'm not going to get it. Even though none of my cameras have AI autofocus, this is not enough for me to justify. If it was a workhorse I was looking for, I would get the A7R5, not the A7CR. If I'm just traveling and it's leisure and I don't want to double back up and do professional work, then that A7CR might do the trick. But honestly, I don't need any of those. Okay, I'll be honest. It's tempting sometimes, but no. Even that new 1635 GM2, which is very tempting, I may not want to get it. I'll explain to you why in the next video, but let me know what you think. Again, don't fall just for the marketing. Think about how you're using your current cameras and what you're limited on. Save that money on the next camera, buddy. Get a better lens. Get a course for your photography, like the 30 Days to do great photos, link below. Or simply break your work to bring it in the real world and realize that your camera doesn't matter as much as your creative vision. And with that being said, I'll see you in the next video. Remember, get out there, go shoot, try something different, try something new. See you in the next one.